Thank you. Mateo, would you go with that light on too for me, please? Maybe 2 or 3 clicks.
Here we go, now we're rolling.
Thank you. All right.
Children are being forced to kill each other, to burn people alive, and abduct other kids to fight other people's wars. It's nothing new. This is the reality for many kids who are alone, orphaned, and frightened. They either choose to or are abducted and forced to fight for an armed group. For centuries, this has been the case for countless kids, and it's still happening today. Joining an armed group has been the only way for many kids to have protection or simply survive. More than 357 million children live in war and conflict zones today, and tens of thousands of children are being used as soldiers. They become fighters, suicide bombers, human shields, messengers, spies, and they are even used for sex. They experience violence to the core, either as witnesses, victims, or active players. A lot of these kids don't make it out alive, and many who do have severe physical and emotional injuries and end up living with disabilities for the rest of their lives.
Life going to be better. We enter a tunnel, we kill people there.
Despite it being an international war crime, 56 non-state armed groups and 7 state armed forces in 14 countries use children as soldiers. It's happening in Colombia, Yemen, Somalia, South Sudan, and Iraq, and most recently in the Syrian war. Terror groups like Daesh, also known as ISIS, and the YPG have been using kids to fight and sending them to their deaths. But there is some help coming from aid organisations like UNICEF and Amnesty International. They've managed to save a number of children from the conflicts in countries like Myanmar, Afghanistan, Chad, and Sri Lanka, and help them to reintegrate into society. What type of future these kids will have, and if they'll ever have a normal life like other kids, is still up in the air.
I just want peace in my life.
Some powerful stuff, right? What do you guys think of it? We have no thoughts about it? All right, well, we'll go ahead then and just roll into our actual lesson for today. And it's kind of going to require each of you to discuss a little bit. So we've got some of these we can share. They're just kind of for reference. It's going to be some lesson vocabulary to go along with today. So actually, if you can pass that back, and you guys can take one or share with some partners here.
And there's some vocabulary in here too that you guys could always use in your essay, like guilty, innocent, amnesty, threatened, stuff like that. You guys could use later.
And I know a couple of those you've seen that Ms. Kipps has introduced already, like the perpetrator and victim is going to be a big part of what we're talking about today. So we'll go ahead. Do you want to start with Omar first? So what your guys' job is going to be is, we've already read a little bit about both their stories. Some of them, or one of them, has already underwent a trial, been convicted, been let free. Ishmael Bea has never gone through court. So our idea here is to go back and act as a jury if they had come through your court system initially. So if each of these guys had been caught, convicted, as a jury, you're supposed to reach a unanimous decision over whether you think each of these guys is innocent, deserves amnesty, or do they deserve to go to jail. So you're gonna have to talk to each other, kind of think to yourselves, you know, why you think they should be let free or not, and then hopefully reach, you know, a unanimous decision on whether we're gonna send these guys to jail.
And if you want to take any like notes to remember, like little points on if they're innocent or guilty on the back of your vocab paper, you absolutely can.
So it is gonna come come up at the end of the day today. So we got defendant one, and I'll let Lexi go ahead and.
Oh, I guess.
That's him.
Well,
You're
yeah.
defendant one now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Alright, so Omar Kadir was born on September 19th, 1986 in Toronto, Canada. He was taken to Afghanistan by his father. Father had ties to Al-Qaeda, allegedly threw a grenade that killed U.S. Army Sergeant First Class Christopher Spear. Eyesight damage in the same fight that killed Spear. Captured at age 15 and taken to Bagram, yes. While in Bagram was refused pain meds for his injuries, was strung up in a doorway, had cold water thrown on him, among other interrogation tactics. Detained in Guantanamo, sorry, I'm having issues with these names, Bay for 10 years, bragged about killing while he was in prison and showed little remorse for his action. Pled guilty in 2010 to murder in violation of the laws of war. First person since World War II to be prosecuted in a military commission for war crimes committed while still a minor. Released in 2015, sued the Canadian government and won $10 million.
Yeah,
What?
10 million Canadian dollars.
Canadian dollars.
Yep, and he did win. So, starting with Omar Kadir, even though he eventually pled guilty in our courts, he turned around and sued the court system for pretty much the whole thing having been, drug out of him wrongfully. If you guys were the court, do you think this guy is innocent? Oh, I saw you say no first. Why?
Because since he bragged about it and stuff, so they didn't care about what he did. So, and since he did kill someone, I think he should be off too.
Now, do you think he was bragging because he was proud of what he did, or do you think he was putting on a facade because of what they already thought about him when they captured him?
I'm not sure.
You're not
Either
sure?
one, it still seems wrong.
Yeah, it's still wrong to be bragging about taking a wife.
Absolutely. Because of that, it's what kill or be killed kind of thing.
Yep.
Does anyone else have any thoughts? Anyone disagree? Anyone agree for a certain reason? No? Awesome.
We're gonna have to reach unanimous, so we're gonna sit on the same guy.
We're gonna
So
start
I need
calling
a
on
couple
people.
more opinions. Yeah.
I'm gonna call on someone. I'm gonna close my eyes and point. Okay.
He's stuck in.
No eye contact.
You.
Okay, well, I think that he's innocent because they're already emotionally and physically traumatized by the whole thing that went on, and they were practically forced into it because he was abducted, and also he can't really be accepted back into society because of it, so I think that's torture enough.
That's a really good point. Does anyone disagree that he's innocent? Well, you already said you think he's guilty. Does anyone else think that he's guilty? Go ahead, yes.
Okay, so I think he's innocent, because he got drugged and then he had a lot of bad things in his life. And then people saw him like something bad, so he could either be that person, and then like she said, he can't be accepted back to society because he's seen as like a bad person.
I think that is a great point you guys are making. I would like to touch down as far as the differences in our characters here. With Omar, he left the country willingly with his own dad. And it didn't state in his article that they gave him drugs. I know with Ishmael Bea, we did see a lot of the drug addiction being passed to him from, the leaders in this case. But if he left with his dad, do you think he was forced in that point? Or do you think that for some reason, because it was his father, that he wanted to be like him, or, yes?
Women children are often pretty I'm gonna butcher this word, but influenceable. Yeah, that wasn't.
I understand
And,
what you're saying.
And that might have been how he was raised, so he didn't really see much wrong with it. So, from a perspective, he is guilty, but I'm leaning more towards innocent.
And we did see that his parents put him in fighting courses and stuff with military grade weapons when he was still young, before he ever went to Afghanistan with his dad. He took fighting courses almost like they were kind of setting him up to be that. I saw a hand over here.
So, kind of like what she said, maybe he was influenced
put down by his family, and that can really damage somebody and influence them to do things. Okay, so you think he was trying to make his family proud, maybe? 'Cause I know I do a lot of things to make my parents proud. I mean, going to college, getting a degree and stuff like that. You do care a lot about what your family thinks about you. Anyone else before we wanna introduce Ishmael?
Are we gonna do a vote?
I think we should vote at the end, because
Okay.
we're gonna get some information on both these guys, and then we will deliberate towards the end.
Absolutely.
So I know it's been a little bit since you guys have done the stuff on Ishmael Bea, so we'll do a little bit of a backtrack on him. He was born November 23rd, 1980 in Sierra Leone, and his hometown was actually invaded by the rebels, and his parents were killed when he was out having a fun time with his friends or something. He came back and his whole village was pretty much razed to the ground. And after all the destruction in his town, he ended up fleeing with a group of other boys, and they went through issues of starvation and pretty much just trying to stay under the radar with all the fighting with both sides going on. And he ended up getting recruited by the government army, and he felt like he had no choice, because it was either, you know, join this military that were supposed to be the good guys, or end up getting killed possibly by the rebels. So he was our one that we were talking about that was fed drugs, the amphetamines, marijuana, and brown, which is awful, cocaine and gunpowder. I mean, obviously none of this is good to ingest, but they were giving these kids gunpowder as well. He was eventually rescued by UNICEF, which we just were hearing about in this video here with Amnesty International, so they're still around trying to help some of these kids throughout the world that are still fighting. And he said his main reason for fighting was that he was addicted to drugs, he was brainwashed by this army, and he felt pressure that he wouldn't be able to leave because he'd have nowhere else to go. And he lived with his foster mother in New York City for a long time. Lauren Sims brought him home with her through the UNICEF program. And he actually has since graduated high school, graduated college, and now works as a political activist about this stuff with child soldiers. And I know you've seen his book, maybe read just the first chapter?
Just the first
Part of
chapter.
it? All right, so we'll go ahead and open the floor with him. Is this young man guilty or is he innocent? Okay, why do you think he's innocent in comparison to Omar?
Because it says that he was drugged, and it said that he was brainwashed, so you don't really know what you're doing at the time, or even if you do, yeah. Plus he said he didn't have a choice really, so it was either his life or theirs.
Okay.
Does anyone disagree with that? Anyone think he's guilty?
I see a wavering hand in the middle here, a
Yes.
mid-grade.
Kind of.
We would love to hear
It's-
more.
I lost my train of thought.
That's all right. You can come back to it if you want to. Can we hear from our trio in the middle here? Yeah. Why not?
I think he's innocent because he said he felt pressure to do it, and sometimes you can't like think straight when you're under pressure.
Okay.
So
And
it was like maybe he just like maybe that way because he was under pressure. I think if he was under pressure, his choice might have been different.
And we talked about the pressure with Omar from his family. With Ishmael Bea not having any family around, what do you think his primary pressure was to join the army?
His life, he was like really just the one that said move on his life, being started and all that.
Okay. All right, we're coming back. We found our train of thought.
Yeah. Alright. So they're both kind of on the same thing. Because though Ishmael was a little bit more like he was like drugs and stuff, and his situation was definitely on a comparison worse. It's also but also I forgot his name already. They're yeah.
That's alright, we totally have time if you want us to pop back to you
I'm
again.
sorry. No, don't be. I understand. It's morning time. I'm still waking up. So.
We talked about his situation being worse, Ishmael Baez, as far as like going into it. But Omar Kadir was tortured after the fact when he was over at Bagram. He talks about having ice cold water thrown on him or being strung up in the doorway, not being able to take any pain medication. At 15 years old is how he is, so pretty close to the age you guys are at now. So do you think either of them had it worse or just equally as bad at different times?
And he even talked about how Omar didn't have remorse, and he bragged about it. Do you guys think that was like him still being brainwashed? It's all the pressure, or do you think he kind of just became that way? Yes.
I think that maybe because there were people questioning him about it, maybe he just thought that this was time to get it off of his chest.
Okay.
Or maybe just tell them all everything because either way, he thought that he was gonna get hurt.
Kind of like a loyalty thing, pretty much trying to look better to whoever's being commanded, I guess, so he doesn't get tortured and stuff like that.
Yeah, and you're right, you have to think about life after they get out of there too. So if he would have been released back to his family and had any issues talking bad on his religion or his, group of people, his family, anyone else, would he have been able to go back there? So maybe he was bragging to save face for when and if he ended up getting released from there.
Alright, are we reaching a vote?
I think we're pretty close. Does anybody here have anything to add? No? There we are.
I feel like Ishmael felt he had an opportunity to have a better life than the other boys by joining because, as it said, that they were all struggling to stay under radar and to not get killed by either of the sides, and they were starving and stuff and struggling outside. But if he joined, I feel like he had more safety and shelter to be there, and he got fed and stuff by his people. And he seemed like it was a better opportunity because he could last longer than the other boys that were out there because they were struggling already.
Yeah.
So joining that would make his life longer and stuff.
Well, and you have to think as a kid, would you feel more comfortable trying to take care of each other with just you, or would you feel better if you had someone like Miss Kipps that seems, more like a maternal figure? You still look to have someone in charge, especially at 14, 15 years old. You may have just been looking for a new home, because it's gotta be rough to have both of your parents killed at the same time. And where are you supposed to go? Like, what would you guys do if tomorrow you're responsible for finding all your own food and your clothing and getting yourself to school or paying your cell phone bill? Like, you have adults to help you with that until you're ready at a certain point. And so at the same time, if they feel like kids in terms of seeking out someone to take care of them, is their mindset as children when it comes to killing? I see a lot of no's. So I think we will go ahead and bring this to a close for now, and it might end up opening because you guys have to get a general majority vote. So we'll start with Omar Kadir.
Yeah, so for Omar, raise your hand if you think that he's guilty. Okay.
Yeah.
And just so you guys know, everybody has to vote. Okay, alright. Oh, I see. Okay, cool.
We've
Alright,
got
so
1, 2, 3 that think he's guilty.
yeah. Alright, and then four?
Four. So why do you think he's guilty?
I think that he is guilty because not only did he kill all those people, but he did join out of his own free will. And he did also kind of brag about it without trying to make himself sound better about it.
Okay. Why do you think he's guilty? Same thing?
He wouldn't show no remorse.
Okay, so remorse about the actions is a big part of whether they're a perpetrator or a victim? Okay, where was our other guilty? Were you our other guilty? You can say same if you want. It's just all about the same. It's a pretty good, like, general idea about why he might be guilty. So we'll go ahead and flip it to Ishmael for a minute. How many people think that he is guilty? We've got nobody. So pretty easy to say without a doubt that we as a class were going to grant him amnesty. He was a victim in his situation. All right, so his case is easily shut. But we have to figure out a way to either grant Omar Kadir amnesty or send him to jail. Which I mean, he already did go to jail. Or he was in Guantanamo for 10 years already. So I guess, let's try and switch our guilty verdict. Do you think 10 years in Guantanamo was enough of a conviction for him as a child soldier? Raise hands if you think yes.
I'm seeing like shaking heads no. Who's disagreeing with that?
Well, we had our innocent people, so
Okay.
let's go ahead. You said 10 years was enough? 10 years was enough? Was 10 years enough? Okay, so for him, we can pretty much close it that he has at least served his sentence. For those of you that did not think he was innocent, he didn't get out of jail until he was closer to 30, which is older than I am by a year. And so you think about him being in jail from the time I was your guys' age, which was almost 15, 16 years ago. That's a long time to be in jail from a kid. Can you imagine right now, Miss Kipps, as Judge Kipps, telling you guys are gonna go to prison for the next 15 years? What are you gonna do with yourselves? You're not gonna graduate high school. You're not gonna have your first job at, BJ's Freezy or whatever it is that you guys do for first time jobs in the Springs here. And you might not have your first girlfriend, boyfriend, first kid or whatever until you're closer to my age. So it's a lot to think about, and it's a pretty heavy topic as far as that. And I know Ms. Kipps has a closing question, because you guys, they're developing their position on this for their paper, right?
Well, they're talking about both sides.
Okay.
So they have to find out what their reasoning is for both victim and perpetrator, right?
And we had a lot of good ideas from your peers in here, so you can take some of those ideas while you're writing up your closing paperwork. And then save this stuff, because it is super easy just to turn around and put it into your guys' paper without having to rethink over a lot of it yourself.
Also,
Sorry,
No,
go ahead, you keep talking.
you guys were super respectful and so quiet, and that's like awesome. And we cannot thank you enough for that. The fact that no one was talking while we were talking and speaking. So you guys were awesome. Thank you so much for
Not making it more stressful. This is our first lesson we taught this year, so
Yeah.
thank you for not
you guys did great. Thank you so much for participating and working with us.
And actually, no, this is not our last. We'll see you Monday.
Are you gonna come Monday?
I think we have to come last week, so,
Okay.
but we won't
So
have a lesson
we-
next week.
Okay, cause I was gonna say on Wednesday, even if you guys want to come and see a testing process.
I thought we were
It's not CMAS, it is benchmarks, so, quite honestly, I'm not so sure why it would be a big issue, because it's not, like disclosed stuff. I don't know what's on it, but it's not.
Yeah, I'll probably see.
You guys see the board?
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. And we'll talk about Monday, if you guys are coming, I'll tell you a little bit.
I
what's
said
going
thank
on.
you.
You guys are invited anytime.
You are too.
I feel like I
knew what Kaylee did, I would trip.
Kaylee, do you even, let me talk to her really quick. Alright guys, so as the quick writes are coming around, here's what I want you to do, and you know how quick writes work. I give you a small amount of space so you don't feel so overwhelmed that you have to fill out a huge page. You have done a lot of research. You've just heard a lot of ideas. You've mentioned quite a few ideas on why people are seeing these child soldiers, especially those two, victim, perpetrator. Why? And I know a lot of you are struggling with that idea. Here's what I want you to write down. You're gonna do two things today. You are gonna first decide on what did you feel that you've read, learned, used, whatever you may be thinking at this point, what do you feel was that best piece of information that you remember from all your learning for the last 2 weeks on why child soldiers are seen more as the victim. That they're innocent, they shouldn't be going to trial, they should have a chance to be able to live their lives. The second thing is that I also want you to switch it. What kind of information, because I know this was the tough one, what awesome information did you find that it's like, okay, now I see on why people are seeing them more as that perpetrator. And a lot of you have pulled from all of those pieces that we've talked about. So I want you to just take a couple seconds maybe to think and then jot down your ideas. Do I have to have full sentences? On a quick write?
No.
What?
No.
What?
No.
No. All your ideas get to the point, okay? Ready? Caleb. Sorry, I can't reach you. What was that? Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, no. I'll be happy, because I think they're gonna stay for the next hour too, sweetie.
Make it good.
You better be convincing me, convince, because that's what you're gonna wanna talk about in your paper, talking to Mark.